The title of our study for this evening, I've changed the title, but it's the same presentation that's on the flyer, is Reflections on the Mother of All Conspiracies. Reflections on the Mother of All Conspiracies. As we look out at the world with bloodshot eyes, everything seems to be in disorder and in disarray. Wars, rumors of wars, the disintegration of the nuclear family, unprecedented economic stress for many people, pandemics, floods, droughts, famines, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, fires, political strife, riots in the streets, mass shootings, armed robberies, mass migration, drug trafficking, suicides. I could lengthen the list of everything that is taking place in this world, and it is becoming worse and worse as time goes by. The world seems to be spinning out of control. It seems like the demons are in control of historical events. But the question is, are they really in control of historical events? The Bible provides us the unequivocal answer. The answer is that the demons are not in control, even though it might appear that they are. You see, the Bible tells us that Satan was cast out as the representative of this world, the ruler of this world, at the cross of Calvary. He has legally lost the right to represent this world. He has legally lost his position as ruler of the world, which he took away from Adam when he overcame Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And because of this, he's a wounded warrior. He has a wound on his head. Remember the prophecy of Genesis 3:15? He will wound your head, and you will wound his heel. And so he's like a lion that has been wounded. A wounded lion is more dangerous than a well lion, because the lion becomes furious. Go with me in your Bibles to Revelation chapter 12 and verse 12. Revelation 12 and verse 12 is telling us what the world should look forward to, and it also tells us how heaven reacted to the victory of Christ at the cross of Calvary. It says, because Satan was cast out as the ruler of this world and as the representative of this world, therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. You see, heaven can rejoice because Satan has been cast out as the ruler and representative of planet Earth. Jesus now is the representative and the ruler of this earth. So heaven could rejoice. But now notice what it says about the earth. Woe! You catch the contrast? Rejoice, heaven. On the earth, woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea. For the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he has but a short time. Now you say, Pastor, where does the Bible say that Satan was cast out at the cross? I thought he was cast out of heaven originally when he sinned against God. He was, according to Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 14. But Revelation chapter 12 is not referring to his original casting out from heaven. It's referring to him being cast out as the ruler and representative of planet Earth. I want you to notice John 12, 31 to 33. Here Jesus is about to die. It's a couple of days before Jesus actually dies on the cross. And he's going to say something very interesting. It says there in John chapter 12, verse 31, 32 and 33, Jesus is speaking, now is the judgment of this world. Now, the ruler of this world will be cast out. So was there a casting out at the cross? Yes. And you say, how do you know that Jesus was referring to the cross? Because of verse 32 and 33. Jesus says, and I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all peoples to myself. This he said, signifying by what death he would die. So how was Satan cast out? By the way, who represented this world before Jesus died on the cross? Remember the book of Job? Where you have this heavenly council and the representatives of the worlds of the universe go to present themselves before the Lord. Who went representing planet Earth? It was Satan who went representing planet Earth because he stole Adam's position. In fact, when Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, Satan says to him, you know, if you bow down and worship me, I will give you all of this power that has been given to me. And so Satan was cast out as the ruler of this world and as the representative who would go to heavenly meetings representing planet Earth. So heaven could rejoice, but woe to the earth. And as time nears its end, Satan will be more and more active because he's a desperate foe. He sees that he's losing his kingdom. And he says, I'm not going to go without a bang. Do you remember the Gulf War? Saddam Hussein, when he realized that he was lost, that he could not prevail, he lit all of the oil wells. It took months to put them out. It was the action of a desperate foe. And that's what Satan is doing in the world today. He knows that his time is short, the Bible says. And of course you say, well, it's been 2,000 years since Jesus died on the cross. Yeah, but what is 2,000 years compared to eternity? I mean, within the context of eternity, 2,000 years is a short period of time. And he knows now that his time is really, really short, now as we've neared the end of history. So as we approach the end, the angels are going to release the winds of strife. And Ellen White has a statement which is amazing in the book Education, page 179 and 180, where she wrote, angels are now restraining the winds of strife, that they may not blow until the world shall be warned of its coming doom. But a storm is gathering, ready to burst upon the earth. And when God shall bid his angels loose the winds, there will be such a scene of strife as no pen can picture. In fact, Ellen White states that when probation closes, Satan will have full control of the impenitent. He doesn't have full control now because the angels are restraining the winds. But when probation closes and all cases are decided, Satan will have full control over all of the wicked. Can we imagine a world where Satan is in control of the wicked, of all of the wicked? You're going to have the same experience as is described in the book of Job. You know, with one exception, and that is Satan is going to cause suffering for God's people, severe suffering. But God is going to say to him, you can't kill them. There will be no one who will die during this time of trouble after probation closes. Now, with the passing of time, I have become keenly aware of the importance of studying history. You say, why is it important to study history? Because what happened in the past is going to happen again. History repeats itself. You say, now why does history repeat itself? For three reasons. Number one, God doesn't change. Number two, the devil doesn't change. And number three, unconverted human beings don't change. So you put a God that doesn't change, and a Satan that doesn't change, and the wicked that don't change, and you have a repetition of the events of history over and over again. Go with me to Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 9. And I'm reading this from the New King James Version. Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 9. Here it speaks about the repetition of history. It says, that which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. And then we have chapter 3 and verse 15. Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 15, the same book, and I'm reading from the New International Version here. It says, what happens now has happened in the past. And what will happen in the future has happened before. God makes the same things happen again and again. So the Bible itself tells us that history repeats itself. However, the history that we see with our naked eye is not the real history that is transpiring in this world. You see, there are two powers in the background that we can't see that are struggling one with the other, and the events in visible history are only a repercussion of what is taking place behind the scenes that we can't see with the physical eye. You know, a historian, a common ordinary historian, can only tell you what is before the eye. A historian can tell you about events that occurred with certain individuals at a certain time, in a certain way, in a certain place. That's visible history. That's what I call horizontal history, the history that we can see. But there is a vertical history, which is the battle between Christ and Satan, which we can't see. We can only see the effects. We can only see the impact of the events that are before our eyes. But what happens before our eyes is simply a repercussion, a visible repercussion of what Satan and God are doing in the backdrop that we cannot see. The Apostle Paul expressed this in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 13, and this is a well-known passage that's speaking about clothing ourselves with the armor of God. He said, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood." What does that mean, flesh and blood? It means human beings. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. You know, let's say something about the book of Esther. Have you all read the book of Esther? You know, this is an interesting book. It's the only book in the Bible that does not mention the name of God. But when you read the story, there's just too many coincidences in order for this simply to be the result of human decisions and human events. The providence of God can clearly be seen behind the scenes. Ellen White wrote this statement. It's found in manuscript 51, 1899, where she speaks about what was really going on behind the scenes in the story of Esther. She wrote, "History repeats itself." See, she realized that history repeats itself. She continues, "The same masterful mind that plotted against the faithful in ages past is now at work to gain control of the fallen churches, that through them," see, we can see the churches, but we can't see the one who is influencing the apostate churches. It's not enough for us simply to say, well, you know, the churches are in apostasy. We have to see who has led them into apostasy and why. So she continues saying, "The same masterful mind that plotted against the faithful in ages past is now at work to gain control of the fallen churches, that through them, the visible organizations, he may condemn and put to death all who will not worship the idol Sabbath. We have not to battle with mortals, as it may appear. We war not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against wicked spirits in high places. So there is a conspiracy behind history. And the conspiracy cannot be seen with the naked eye. What does the word conspiracy awaken in our minds? Well, I think the best way to illustrate what a conspiracy is by referring to the story of Judas Iscariot. You know, the Bible tells us that Judas Iscariot feigned or faked love for Jesus. He exhibited apparently his support of Christ, but behind the scenes, which could not be seen, he was actually plotting to have Christ betrayed. Now, if we didn't have the Bible, we would think that Judas was just a nasty guy. But the Bible takes away the veil and shows us the conspiracy behind Judas feigning support for Christ and at the same time in the background plotting to betray him. Let's notice several verses so that you can see the conspiracy behind visible events. John 13, verse 27. John chapter 13 and verse 27. See who is behind Judas. There's a power behind Judas. A historian could never tell you this, because historians deal only with events that they can see, that occurred in a certain place, with certain people, in a certain way, for a certain reason. A historian simply can describe, what is before the eye. But notice what it says in John 13, verse 27. Now after the piece of bread, Satan entered him. Could a common, ordinary historian write that? No, because Satan is invisible. All you see is the impact of what Satan is doing with Judas. So it says, after the piece of bread, Satan entered him. Then Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. By the way, were the disciples aware that there was a conspiracy in the heart of Judas behind his feigning support for Christ? They did not have the foggiest idea, because they were looking at the history that you can see. Notice John 13, 28 and 29. John 13, 28 and 29. Speaking about the disciples, it says, but no one at the table knew for what reason he said this to him. What you're going to do quickly. They thought that Jesus was sending them on an errand, maybe to get some bread or something. Continues saying, for some thought, because Judas had the money box, that Jesus had said to him, buy those things we need for the feast, or that he should give something to the poor. So what were the disciples looking at? They were simply looking at the history that can be seen before the naked eye. But they didn't realize that behind the scenes there was a conspiracy. Feigning support for Christ visibly, but invisibly plotting to overthrow Christ. And by the way, Satan was behind it. Notice John 6, 70 and 71. How Jesus referred to Judas. John 6, verses 70 and 71. Jesus says, did I not choose you, speaking to the 12, and one of you is a devil? Could a common, ordinary historian write that? Judas is a devil. No. But Jesus knew that there was somebody behind Judas, encouraging Judas to do what he did. So it says, did I not choose you, the 12, and one of you is a devil? And then it explains, he spoke of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, for it was he who would betray him being one of the 12. So was Judas an instrument of the devil? Yes. Did the people discern that at that point? No. It was a secret conspiracy. So we have to look at the history behind history. And of course, in a moment, we're going to say, how can we do that? How can we see the history that we can't see? Let's read one more verse on Judas. John 13 and verse 2. John 13 verse 2. Here, Christ explicitly says why Judas is going to betray him. It says there, and supper being ended, the devil, who? The devil, having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Was there a conspiracy? Could people discern the conspiracy? No. Did Jesus discern it? He most certainly did. Now, here's the big question. How can we fight an invisible foe? It would seem to be well nigh impossible to fight against an enemy that we can't see. But we can see it. Because this book removes the veil and helps us see the history behind history. Furthermore, God has given us a great gift in the spirit of prophecy. If you read the book, The Great Controversy, that is not a book of history. It is a philosophy of history. What makes her book unique, she did borrow from other writers, and in the introduction to the book, she says she did. So she's not trying to hide anything. But Ellen White, in The Great Controversy, what makes the book unique is that on every page, she's talking about what Satan is doing and history that is transpiring as a result of what Satan is trying to do. We need to look at history that way. You know, our teachers in our universities, our teachers in our schools, they need to teach the history behind history. They need to teach that what we see in history is only the result of events and movements that are taking place behind the scenes. So the book Great Controversy, it shouldn't surprise us that Satan tried to kill Ellen White. You've heard the story undoubtedly. Ellen White went to a funeral in Lovett's Grove. It's Bowling Green today, Ohio. And at the funeral, God gave her a vision, a 2-hour vision of the Great Controversy theme from beginning to end. It was only a sketch. Later on, the Lord would give her additional visions to fill in the gaps. But she received that vision, 2 hours long. And when she came out of vision, after the funeral, she and her husband were going back to Battle Creek where they lived, and on the train, and they decided to stop at the Palmer residence. The Palmers were good friends of the Whites. And Ellen White there suddenly felt a very strong sensation on one side of her body. She had a stroke. And after that, she was only able to write 1 page, and then she had to rest 3 days and write another page because she had been talking with her husband on the train ride back to Michigan about the need to publish what she had seen in the vision, which would be the original Great Controversy, which is Spiritual Gifts. The book Spiritual Gifts is the first Great Controversy vision. You can still get those little books written by Ellen White. And so she had a stroke. A couple of months later, God showed her that at the Palmer residence, it was the plan of Satan to kill her because of the book that she was going to write. But the Lord spared her, and she regained her health, and she was able to write freely. And of course, the book Great Controversy that we have today is the greatest expansion of all of the visions that God gave Ellen White. And once again, the book takes away the veil, like the book of Revelation does, and shows us the real controversy behind the controversies that take place in history. In the book Colporteur Ministry, It's a book that she wrote for literature evangelists. Page 127, she wrote this about great controversy. The great controversy should be very widely circulated. It contains the story of the past, the present, and the future. In its outline of the closing events of this earth's history, it bears a powerful testimony in behalf of the truth. I am more anxious to see a wide circulation of this book than for any others I have written. For in the great controversy, the last message of warning to the world is given more distinctly than in any of my other books. In another quotation, manuscript 31, 1890, she wrote, the results of the circulation of this book, The Great Controversy, are not to be judged by what now appears. By reading it, some souls will be aroused and will have courage to unite themselves at once with those who keep the commandments of God. In other words, some people, right after they get the book, they'll read it. They say, wow, this is wonderful, and they embrace the truth. But then she speaks of another group. But a much larger number who read it will not take their position until they see the very events taking place that are foretold in the book. When Sunday starts being agitated, they say, oh, I remember that Seventh-day Adventist evangelist talking about Sunday, and now it's taking place. And so then they'll read more carefully the great controversy, and they'll embrace the truth. She continues, the fulfillment of some of the predictions will inspire faith that others also will come to pass. And when the earth is lightened with the glory of the Lord, that's the loud cry, in the closing work, many souls will take their position on the commandments of God as a result of this agency. So, we distribute the book Steps to Christ. It's a wonderful book. And we distribute Desire of Ages. That's also a wonderful book. But Ellen White stated that the great controversy needs to go out like the leaves of autumn. And she even says that for some people, they'll take the book and they'll put it on their bookcase, and they won't give it another look until the Holy Spirit tells them, now's the time. And they will not only embrace the truth, but they will become champions in proclaiming the truth. So what's my point? My point is that Daniel and Revelation take away the veil so that we can see the history behind history. The book Great Controversy, the genius of the book Great Controversy, is that on every single page, Ellen White is telling why Satan is doing behind the scenes what we can see. So we need to read history with enlightened eyes. We say, oh, wars and rumors of wars. Pestilence and hunger and, riots and all those things. Why is this happening? Well, Ellen White explains. And I'm coming to this a little bit later. She says, because ultimately Satan, when things get really bad, he's going to blame God's people. All these things, all these wars and pestilences and everything have one purpose. And that is to eventually say, the Lord is angry because Sunday's not being kept. And we have this little group that insists on being rebellious. They don't obey the laws of the land. And therefore, if we can get rid of them, God is going to favor us again. By the way, it's not a new argument. Who did the people persecute in the days of Elijah? The king said, oh, you troubler of Israel, all these problems have come because of you. Tell me one prophet that the people ever loved. One true prophet that the people ever loved. You want to give me one? There's none. Why? Because the prophets, true prophets, ruffle feathers. True prophets tell it like it is. And people want to continue living in their sins. And so the best way, instead of letting the Holy Spirit change the life, what they do is try and crucify the prophet. And they think that by getting rid of the prophet, they're getting rid of the problem. But they're not really getting rid of the problem at all. Now, I want you to notice this statement in the book Education, page 173. This is an important statement because she's referring to the history behind history that we can only read with enlightened eyes. See, I can't read these pages without my glasses. Everything's blurry. But when I put on my glasses, I can read perfectly. And so it is with history. When we look at history, if we don't do it through the Bible and the Spirit of prophecy, everything's blurry. But when we take the Bible, Daniel, Revelation, and we take the Spirit of prophecy, the great colors say, ooh, I can see clearly now. I can see what is transpiring behind the scenes. Why Satan is doing what he's doing. Notice this statement. This is 173 education. In the annals of human history, the annals mean the records, the books. In the annals of human history, the growth of nations, the rise and fall of empires appear, that's the key word, once again, in the annals of human history, the growth of nations, the rise and fall of empires appear to depend on the will and prowess of man. Isn't that true? Powerful nations. Why do they rise? Well, because they have better weapons. They have more intelligent individuals. They have more resources. That's the way people usually explain it. And she says, they appear to depend on the will and prowess of man. The shaping of events seems, see, first of all she said appear, now she says seems to a great degree to be determined by man's power, ambition, or caprice. In other words, if you look at history simply as it's being written, it appears that it's because of the prowess and greatness of man. Like Nebuchadnezzar. Isn't this great Babylon that I have built with my power for my glory? And if you look at Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, you say, you know, he brought about this great kingdom. But the Lord taught him a great lesson. He says, oh really? You're going to be a vegan for 7 years. And by the way, it did him well. Because after 7 years, he had a much clearer mind. I'm not making a point of it. But in that story, we find very clearly what is happening behind the scenes. That God is in control. And God teaches rulers, I'm in control. And Ellen White says that the pearl of reason that God gave Nebuchadnezzar, he removed the pearl of reason. And he thought that he was an animal. She continues writing. But in the Word of God, see, in the annals of human history, the growth of nations, the rise and fall of empires appear to depend on the will and prowess of man. The shaping of events seems to a great degree to be determined by man's power, ambition, or caprice. But in the Word of God, the curtain is drawn aside. And we behold, remember these words, we behold behind, above, and through all the play and counterplay of human interests and power and passions, the agencies of an all-merciful one, silently, patiently working out the counsels of his own will. Powerful statement. That man seems to be great. But it says that in the Bible, the curtain is drawn aside, and we behold behind, above, and through all the play and counterplay of human interests and power and passions, the agencies of the all-merciful one, silently, patiently working out the counsels of his own will. You would never know that unless you had the Bible. You would never know that unless you had the Spirit of prophecy. That there's a power behind the scenes that is greater than the power of Satan. And a power that ultimately will prevail. Now, I want to dwell for a few moments on the expression that Ellen White uses, play and counterplay of human interests and power and passions. Play and counterplay. That has to do with a game, right? You play, and then the other player counterplays. So I like to compare history with a game of chess. I don't play chess because it's too complicated for my mind. I can only play a game where you move forward, not to the sides. Way too complicated for my mind. But I want you to imagine a game of chess. By the way, is history very complicated? Think history is complicated? Oh, extremely complex. You say, how is God going to get out of this one? And why is Satan doing this? So I want you to imagine a game of chess where God is sitting on one side of the table and Satan is seated on the other side of the table. And you have the chessboard and you have the pawns. The movement of the pawns are the movements of history, the events of human history. So God says to Satan, I'll give you the first move. And so then Satan makes a move. And God says, okay, you've moved, now it's my turn. So then God moves to counteract what Satan has done. And Satan says, oh, I wish I knew he was going to do that. But then he maneuvers and he finds a way to bypass it. He makes a move. And then God says, okay, my turn. So then God moves. And so history progresses like that. Play and counterplay. Of course, the ultimate purpose of the game of chess is to put the other player at check and eventually checkmate. Right? And so you have history, the events of history, God playing, Satan counteracting. Satan playing, God counteracting. But here's the beautiful point. Satan can't win. Because before the game starts, God already knows all the moves he's going to make. How would you like to play a game of chess if you already knew all the moves the other player was going to make? There's no chance you could lose. Satan has to guess how God is going to move. And when you have to guess, you make mistakes. And we're going to see that. I'm just giving you the philosophical point now. We're going to go through the Bible and I'm going to show you, I'm going to illustrate with real life situations everything that we're talking about as we begin our study. So Satan cannot win. It's impossible because he has to guess how God is going to move. Let me give you an example. And we're going to look at several examples from the Old Testament. And then in our second session, we're going to look at several examples from the New Testament, because the second presentation is just a continuation and a conclusion of what we're studying now. You remember that God told Abram, he wasn't Abraham yet, he was Abram, in Genesis chapter 15. God said, your descendants will go to a nation that is not theirs, and they will be enslaved there. And after 400 years, they will return once again to their land, to Canaan. Now, there's an interesting detail there, and that is that God did not mention the nation. He said they will be taken to a land that is not theirs. Did God know where they were going to go? Did God know they were going to go to Egypt? Yes. Yeah. Did he know they were going to spend 400 years there? Yes. That at the end of 400 years they were going to return once again to Canaan with great riches? Yes, God knew that. Why did he say, your descendants are going to be taken to Egypt, where they'll spend 400 years in bondage, and then they'll be delivered to go back to their land with great riches? Because God already knew how Satan was going to play. Let me explain how. If God had identified the land as Egypt, he would have never exported Joseph to Egypt. Right? Because the devil's not a dummy. You know, he's super smart. He can read between the lines. But Satan had no idea that by getting Joseph's brothers to hate him, and by exporting him to Egypt, and thinking that he had gotten rid of Joseph, that by exporting him, God was making it possible for Jacob's whole family to go to Goshen. By the way, it was providential that God could not leave them in the promised land because they had not grown, they were small. And those nations were powerful. They would not be able to overcome those nations. And furthermore, if they spread out in the land of Canaan, they would have embraced the idolatry of Canaan. So God says, I'm going to export them to Egypt. And they end up in Goshen, which was isolated from the Egyptians because the Egyptians could not stand to be in the presence of shepherds. And so to a great degree, they were shielded from idolatry. See how God is working? Did God already know that there was going to be a famine for 7 years? Yes. So what does God do? He says, oh, I'll export Joseph to Egypt. And that way, I'll save the seed from whom the Messiah will come. And also, after 400 years, I'm going to take them back to the land with great riches. God already knew all that. And he knew how Satan was going to work. Are you following how this is a play and a counterplay? And by the way, Joseph 3 times at the end of the story when he identifies himself to his brothers, he says, don't cry. The Lord sent me here before you to save a posterity for you. He says 3 times there in Genesis chapter 45. And by the way, our lessons this next quarter are on Exodus. Why do you suppose the devil, do you think the devil was the one who hardened Pharaoh's heart? Do you think the devil was involved in Pharaoh's, how would I say, in being so determined to not let the people go? Was that Pharaoh or was that Satan influencing the mind of Pharaoh? What Satan is saying is, God got me. I didn't quite understand why exporting Joseph to Egypt was the wrong idea. But now I'm not going to allow the second part of that prophecy to be fulfilled. I'm going to keep them here. They're not going to go back to their land. That's the way you read history with enlightened eyes. Looking at what Satan's objective is and what God's objective would be. Now, let's go to Isaiah 46, verses 9 through 11. What distinguishes the true God from all false pretenders? There's one characteristic that identifies the true God, which the false gods can never measure up to. Isaiah 46, verses 9 through 11 says, remember the former things of old. Here God is speaking. For I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me. What gives God the right to say that? To say, I am God, there is no other. I am God and there is none like me. Here comes the reason why He is greater than all the false pretenders. Declaring the end from the beginning. And from ancient times, things that are not yet done. God is omniscient. Let me ask you, did God already know the entire history of the world before the world was created? Did He know all the moves that Satan was going to make? Yes. By the way, God would not have made the plan of Jesus to be crucified, but He knew that Satan was going to work on the people to crucify Christ. And so what God does is he counteracts what Satan does because he gives certain leeway to Satan to act. Right? But ultimately, God's purpose is fulfilled even when Satan puts obstacles in the way. I don't believe that it was the purpose of God, the original purpose of God, that Jesus would have been taken and crucified, and I don't think that was God's plan. It was Satan's plan. You can tell that those who crucified Christ, they were demon possessed, and God knew it. So God counteracted everything that Satan was doing. He took the bad that Satan was doing and he made good come out of it. Are you following me or not? Because God knows the end from the beginning. And so it says, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel, the word counsel means plan, my plan shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. Calling a bird of prey from the east, the man who executes my counsel from a far country. Indeed, I have spoken it, I will also bring it to pass. I have purposed it, I will also do it. 2 points in these verses. Number one, because God knows the end from the beginning, his plan can't fail. Because he knows everything that Satan is going to do. So does God have to bypass sometimes? Does he have to overcome obstacles that Satan puts in the way? Of course he has to. But he has no problem doing it. Because he knows the end from the beginning. He knows everything that Satan was going to do. Now let's take a biblical example of the history that is being written behind history. The 400 years is one. Let's get another from the Old Testament. We find a story in the book of 2 Chronicles, chapter 18, which is very interesting. It just so happens that Ahab, the king of Israel, of the 10 tribes of the north, and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, of the two tribes of the south, had a meeting together in Samaria, which was the capital of the kingdom of the north. And while they were there, King Ahab, who was a bad king, said to Jehoshaphat, who was a good king, said, don't you think that now that we're together here, it would be good for us to get together and go fight together against our common enemy, the Syrians? And Jehoshaphat, being a good king, said to Ahab, well, that sounds like a good idea. Maybe we should consult the Lord. Do you have a prophet around? And Ahab says, prophets? Galore. I've got 400 of them. And Jehoshaphat, being a good king, it just didn't sound right. So he says to Ahab, now, would you happen to have a prophet of the Lord around? And Ahab said, yes, I do. He's in the dungeon. And Jehoshaphat says, oh, that must be the Lord's prophet, because that's where the Lord's prophets live, in the dungeon. And so then he's called from the dungeon, and the king is going to ask him, Ahab is going to ask him the same question that he asked the false prophets, because Ahab asked the false prophets, Jehoshaphat and me want to go to war against the Syrians. Is that a good idea? And the false prophets they told the king what he wanted to hear. They say, oh yeah, you go to battle, you're going to win a great victory. Jehoshaphat says, no, let's call that prophet who's in the dungeon. So he comes, his name was Micaiah. And they ask him, Ahab asks him the same question. Now, before we continue with the story, I want to go to the end of the story. Let's go to 2 Chronicles, chapter 18, 33 to 34. We're going to go to the end of the story. What happened to Ahab? You know, the false prophet said, go to war, you're going to win a signal victory. But they didn't tell him is that he was going to be killed in battle. So notice what it says in 2 Chronicles 18, verses 33 and 34. Now a certain man drew a bow at random and struck the king of Israel between the joints of his armor. In other words, Ahab. So he said to the driver of his chariot, turn around and take me out of the battle, for I am wounded. The battle increased that day, and the king of Israel propped himself up in his chariot, facing the Syrians until evening, and about the time of sunset, he died. The false prophets say, go, you're going to gain a signal victory, and that didn't happen. He went to battle and he was killed. Now, let's go back in the story to when Micaiah comes to King Ahab. And King Ahab asks him the same question. Suddenly, Micaiah seems to digress from the occasion. What he does doesn't seem to have any connection with what's happening. Notice 2 Chronicles 18, verses 18 to 22. See, the death of Ahab had been decided in the heavenly council before it happened by the influence of Satan. It was Satan who influenced the false prophets to tell Ahab to go to battle so that he would be killed. You would never know that simply by reading the record of the Bible. If the Bible did not explain that Satan was really the one who spoke to the false prophets, so the false prophets would tell Ahab to go to battle so that Ahab would be killed. Let's read the passage. Verse 18. Then Micaiah said, remember, he's just been asked the question, should we go to battle or not? Then Micaiah said, therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne. By the way, it's the same heavenly council of the book of Job. And all the host of heaven standing at his right hand and his left. All the angels are there. And the Lord said, who will persuade Ahab, king of Israel, to go up, that he may fall at Ramoth Gilead? Say to the angels, who wants to go and tell Ahab to go to battle so he's killed? So one spoke in this manner and another spoke in that manner. Nobody wanted to do it. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord and said, I will persuade him. Did Ahab know that this meeting was taking place in the invisible world? He didn't have the foggiest idea. But the Bible takes away the veil. It takes away the curtain and it shows us why the historical event occurred. We have to look at the history behind history. So it continues saying, then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord and said, I will persuade him. The Lord said to him, in what way? So he said, I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. Who was that offered his services to put a lie in the mouth of the prophets to tell Ahab to go to battle so he would be killed? It certainly wasn't a faithful angel. So a faithful angel would not lie, because God cannot lie. So who was this? The same being that went to the heavenly council in the book of Job. So he said, I will go and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And the Lord said, you shall persuade him and also prevail. Go out and do so. So God gave permission to Satan to influence the false prophets, to tell Ahab to go to battle so that he would be killed. That's the history behind history. That's the way we have to look at historical events. That's the way we have to look at prophecy. See, in prophecy, God has removed the veil. In Daniel chapter 2, he removed the veil of world history. In Daniel chapter 7, he told us about what the little horn would do Revelation 13, the role of the United States in prophecy. And by the way, since this war, I was checking on the internet today as I was sitting there waiting for my car. It's amazing the number of evangelicals that are taking this war between Israel and Iran. And they're saying it's a fulfillment of Ezekiel, of Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38. And soon the temple is going to be rebuilt. And, the rapture is going to take place. And the Antichrist is going to sit in the temple. Every time that Israel is stirred up, they have this scenario of the rapture and the rebuilding of the temple, a personal Antichrist that's going to sit in the temple, and the nations are going to come against the Jews. Meanwhile, with enlightened eyes, you look at the prophecy of Revelation 13, and you find that the enemy powers are not in the Middle East, they're in Rome and the United States, and people can't see it because they're reading what's before their eyes. Are you with me? That's why we need to get the book Great Controversy out. It presents the best perspective of end-time events, the true perspective of end-time events. Now, the Bible then removes the veil and helps us see behind, above, and beyond visible history. We can compare the play and counterplay of historical events to a seemingly harmless iceberg that floats leisurely in the North Atlantic. The dangerous part of the iceberg is not what you can see, but what you can't see. Likewise, the history you see is a sliver of the real history that is occurring behind the scenes. And we have to help the world understand this. We have a message for the rulers of the world. Revelation chapter 11 says that we have a message for the kings of the earth, that they will make right decisions. And by the way, in our second sermon, we're going to talk about the importance of helping the political rulers of the earth understand the true scenario of it, what their real role is in history, like Daniel taught Nebuchadnezzar. So the dangerous part is the part that you can't see. Let's take another couple of examples from the Old Testament. And in our second session together, we're going to deal with the New Testament and with end-time events. The story of Esther. There were 3 books of the Old Testament that were the last to be included in the biblical canon. Of the 39 books, the 3 last ones to be included were, number 1, the book of Ecclesiastes. Because Ecclesiastes was too pessimistic. They said, no, that book, vanity of vanity, all is vanity. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That doesn't sound like a Christian philosophy. But they eventually included it. Praise the Lord. Because there Solomon is describing his life separated from God. But the book ends by saying, the end of the matter is this: fear God and keep His commandments. This is the whole duty of man. And he actually tells the youth, youth can be vanity. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Don't do like I did in the days of my youth, is what he's saying. So they included Ecclesiastes. Another book which was one of the last was Song of Songs, because it's too romantic. And then the book of Esther. Because Esther is the only book in the Bible that does not mention the name of God. And yet, you certainly can see God and Satan playing and counterplaying, can't you? I mean, it's as subtle as a freight train. Whistling. Do you think Haman was acting on his own? Without any evil influence? Listen to this statement from Ellen White. 5 Testimonies 4:50. Satan instigated the scheme. of Haman influencing the king. By the way, one of our lessons this quarter was on Esther and Ruth. Unfortunately, the lesson did not deal with end-time events. The story of Esther is going to be repeated on a global scale to a T. Ellen White says that the death decree at the end will have a date in it when the death decree should be executed. And it will be proposed by religious advisors to the civil power for the civil power to impose it on pain of death. There's all kinds of parallels in the story of Esther that are going to repeat on a global scale at the end of time. The book of Esther is actually a prophecy. It's not only history. Many things in the Bible are prophecies, not history. Not mere history. As it was in the days of Noah, so also will it be at the coming of the Son of Man. As it was in the days of Lot, so will it be at the coming of the Son of Man. In fact, the book of Genesis contains all of the seeds of future events. So she wrote, Satan instigated the scheme in order, now she gives the reason, in order to rid the earth of those who preserve the knowledge of the true God. If he gotten rid of all the Jews, where would the Messiah have come from? Satan's plot all throughout the Old Testament is to keep the Messiah from coming. That's how we really need to read the Old Testament. Because Satan knew that his enmity was against the seed of the woman. Right? But here's the good news. Satan instigated this scheme in order to rid the earth of those who preserve the knowledge of the true God, but his plots were defeated by a counterpower that reigns among the children of men. And you see that clearly in the book of Esther, that God had the last word. He delivered his people. What about the book of Job? Another illustration. You know, what could a historian say about Job if he was simply looking at what happened to Job? Man, that guy really had bad luck, didn't he? Karma caught up to him. A historian could only say that. Because he's looking only at, it happened to this guy at this place. Just all of a sudden he lost everything. Man, what bad luck. But the book of Job removes the veil. And it tells us that behind the scenes, there was a meeting in heaven. Just like we noticed in the case of Ahab. There was a meeting in heaven. And there was a conversation. And God says to Satan, who goes before the heavenly council, he says, have you seen my servant Job? He lives in your territory, but he's my servant. Does Job know that he's the subject of conversation? Do you think it would have been easier for him if he had known the subject of conversation? Of course it would have been easier. He would have said, all the more I'm going to be faithful to the Lord. I'm going to make the devil look bad. But he didn't know. Did all the heavenly beings know what was going on? See, all heaven knows what's going on in history. But unfortunately, human beings simply see what's before their eyes. Job didn't have the foggiest idea until the end of the story. He now understands. He says, oh, now I understand who was causing all my problems. The one who was causing his problems in the beginning of the book is called Satan, but at the end of the book he's called Leviathan. In Job 41. He says, now I understand, Job says. I've been the subject of conversation. Praise the Lord that I make the right decisions. So does the Bible remove the veil in the story of Job? You better believe it does. You would never know that Satan and God were having a battle unless you had the Bible book. That's the importance of the Bible. It takes away the veil. That's the importance of the book Great Controversy. God wants us to see what's really happening in history. and what the reasons are. Now, let's see if maybe we'll take a break here. And how do you want to do this? How long are we going to take a break? We still have to deal with the New Testament. All the examples are from... Are you understanding the gist of this? This is foundational to everything else we're going to study in the course of this half a week. How long should we take, brother? Pardon?
We start at 7.
What time is it?
6:30.
Maybe we can start at 6:45. 6:45? Yeah. That way we'll be on our way at a decent hour. Okay.